Hello everyone, this is Alex and welcome to Burtonland, where I discuss all things Tim Burton on my channel. I thought it would be interesting to start off something new, which is doing a rankings list. I have done top 10 lists, Tim Burton related, so if you want to check those out, they're available. But I thought it might be interesting just to go from the worst to the best in certain elements that make up a Tim Burton film. The first one pretty much came instantaneously, and that is, of course, the music from the films of Tim Burton. The reason why is mainly because due to the collaborations that Tim Burton has had over the years, he really likes using the same people, and a lot of people usually associate him with Johnny Depp as his leading actor. However, the collaboration that really comes to mind first is his collaboration with Danny Elfman, a composer who has pretty much done almost I say almost every Tim Burton film. Obviously, he has worked with other composers, and which I will go into, and I will credit them when we get there. But yeah, no, it was the it's mainly been Tim and Danny. They started off from the beginning at the same time, and thankfully seem to be sticking around for a while since the release of Wednesday. So I thought it'd be pretty good to go from the my least favorite soundtrack to my most favorite soundtrack. Now I'm going to be going through certain aspects in what makes a good movie soundtrack. So it's not gonna show my opinions on the movies as a whole. I am just judging it as a score. So there are different elements I'll be thinking of is, a, how well does it work within the movie. B, how much do I actually listen to it? How much do you want to like listen to it on its own? And and then the third one is really my bias coming in, is how much these particular scores mean to me personally. So, yeah, keep that in mind. This is really a personal opinion. If you like or dislike any of these scores more than any other, it'd be interesting to know your rankings and which soundtrack means the most to you. So this is just my opinion, and I hope you have fun. And I just want to point out for the record, before I go into it, I do not think there is a single bad soundtrack from any Tim Burton films. So I just want to emphasize that even though we're going for my least favorite, I do not think there is a single bad one. So I think it goes from good to great to amazing to absolute masterpieces. Oh, and also due to the fact that I can't really uh, play the actual music from the films due to copyright, what I will be doing is I will be doing a track. I'll be doing a track list. So with each film, I will say what my personal favorite tracks are. So if you want to go and listen to them, then feel free. So from 21 all the way to 11, I will list my top three tracks. From 10 to 6, I will be doing my top four. 5 and 4, I will be doing my top 5, and then pretty much the top 3 is just pick any track from that CD because I love it all. So without further ado, this is my rankings from worst to the best of the music from the films of Tim Burton. Enjoy. So, starting this list with, in my opinion, the worst soundtrack of a Tim Burton film. At number 21, it is 2012's Dark Shadows. Now, this might actually come as a shock to some of you because if anyone catches on, is that I absolutely adore Dark Shadows as a movie, and it's one of my all-time favorite movies actually. So why is it at the very very bottom? Well, it's not necessarily that the score is bad, as I've said before, but the biggest problem I have is that it is very overshadowed by the other soundtrack, which is, of course, all the songs to emphasis on the time period that Dark Shadows takes place in, which is the 1972. So there's a lot of early 70s songs involved, and it is a big part of the movie, and it's what makes it, in my opinion, I think it adds to the humor, and shows the variety of songs that the 70s had. So we've got, we got the Moody Blues, we've got T-Rex, we've got Iggy Pop, we've got, of course, Alice Cooper, we've got the Carpenters, we've got Barry White. And actually, in all honesty, I probably listened to that soundtrack more than the Danny Elfman score, sadly to say. But having that said, the score is not bad. I just think that the songs that they use for the 1970s just kind of, um, is more in the spotlight than the actual score. But actually, let's go over the score a little bit. Um, I you, I think there's two main themes that I could that sort of stick out to me. One is, of course, more like Barnabas Collins score, which kind of sort of gives a very sort of almost tragic figure like, but also keeping that vampire element in there, especially with the hypnotic music that really stands out. And then the other theme I have is probably Angelique, from either. Sort of the very very flirtatious femme fatale, and then to absolute absolute obsessive rage that she has. Honestly, these two characters are probably my favorite from the film, just because their chemistry, their love-hate relationship is just, I don't know, it's just so fascinating to watch, and I think that's probably why the music stands out so much from them too. So my top three favorite tracks from Dark Shadows would be Deadly Handshake, Vicky's Nightmare, and House of Blood. Moving on to number 20, this again will probably surprise a lot of people, because it is again one of my favorites. But sadly, the music is a little bit on the, I want to say, more on the quiet angle. So it doesn't really have much to have that re-listen factor. However, when it is used in the movie, it is brilliant, and that is 2014's Big Eyes. So again, I think this is one of Tim Burton's criminally underrated films ever. I think it is such a beautiful film, and as I said, I don't think the soundtrack is necessarily bad, but it's not something that I would necessarily listen on my own, so I do have to think about that. However, in the moments that it is used within the film, it does really suit it. There is obviously the two main characters are the big focus, and that plays in the music. In fact, it's probably the reason why Big Eyes is one of my favorite openings, and the music, it really does tell a story along with the opening shot that happens. You've got the close shot of the big eyes, pretty much, and the music that is playing is this very soft, very quiet, very almost melancholy tone, and to me that really signifies Margaret, because it is, that shot is just that detail of the paintings, and then as soon as the printing of the painting starts, the music gets a little bit faster, and to me it becomes Walter's theme almost, and it just shows uh, the really the lie and the credit that he took over her paintings. I think it really does tell the story right then and there, through both the visuals and the music. Other points that uh, I I really love is mainly whenever Margaret comes across a revelation, particularly the moment where she discovers, spoiler alert, that other paintings that Walter may have painted may actually be yet another lie. And there's this key moment where the piano kind of kicks in, and it's very it's almost like playing like one note. It sort of reminded me a lot of like music from a Stanley Kubrick movie, which wouldn't surprise me if that was used as inspiration. I know that Big Eyes has a lot of inspiration from Hitchcock. Not just from the dysfunctional relationship, though that helps, but also the setting of San Francisco as well. So um, yeah, so I really loved that particular moment. And I should probably mention the inclusion of Lana Del Rey. At first, I was a little bit like, okay, I'm not quite sure how to feel about this. However, the more I thought about it and the more I watched the movie, I realized, okay, I can see why it was used because it is used in a moment. The first time you ever hear the song is when Margaret is basically, she's just shopping and she's seeing all these prints, all these copies of her paintings, and it just gets a little bit overwhelming for her that she starts seeing big eyes on every one that she goes through, and it's quite haunting. And eventually she goes back to her studio and tries to paint in a different style. And it's a way of her to try and do something that's for her, that's not a lie. Um, you know, uh, uh, as she said, it would be nice to have, to have something to say that, yes, that is mine, that is my painting, because, well, she doesn't get to with her own. And the other moment is when you don't necessarily hear the lyrics, but you definitely hear the instrumental of that song when she first meets um oh my god, the names escape me. Jehovah's Witness, thank you. Sorry, it took me a minute. Where she is first introduced to them, and it sort of opens up her world a little bit, and it becomes a very important aspect of her life. And when she is about to go on radio and finally announce the truth that it was her who did the big eye paintings, and so just that little beat, and I think it was when I heard that I thought, oh, okay, I see it. And then, of course, another uh, another song that Lana Del Rey provided was, of course, at the end credits, where Margaret finally gets her freedom and her truth out there. So, in some ways, in context of the film, I do understand it. So, and that really goes for the whole score. In context of the movie and watching the movie, it's great. However, it's not something that I would listen to over and over again. Top three tracks are the opening, S Zinnik, and A Challenge. Coming up at number 19, we have one that I think was certainly a challenge for Danny Elfman and for Tim Burton, because it was a I do not want to use the word remake, because I do not think it is a remake. It is more of a reimagining. I think people who say it is a remake clearly have not watched them back to back. But anyway, it is 2001's Planet of the Apes. Now, the reason I say it's more of a reimagining than a remake, because it really goes and explores different. It really is just watching two completely different movies. They just happen to have the same title and the same kind of premise, really. So I do think it's a little bit unfair to keep calling it a remake. So I do not want to call it that. We're just going to call it a reimagining. So anyway, getting to the music, I think what was the challenge for Danny in this case was A, try not to sound too much like the original. B, try to make it have almost like a sort of jungle tribal esque nature to it, not just due to the apes themselves, but also as the humans at this point in time are more in tribes. The idea of this particular storyline was that the apes are slowly evolving a bit more human, and the humans are slowly declining into that sort of primate mentality. So it's interesting to see the halfway point of the two species. Um, and the third one is to also make it sound sci-fi, because it is a science fiction movie at the end of the day as well. So I think it's, I think with all that combined, I think it was certainly a challenge, but I think he pulled it off really well. The only reason I would say it's a little bit on the lower end is because really because it's mainly action music. I'm not a huge fan of action music in particular. Although having said that, there are going to be other action music, but let's be honest, it is a lot better. So we'll see how it goes. So yeah, I definitely don't want to, uh, I definitely want to give credit where credit's due because I do think this movie was a challenge in all aspects. Like trying to reimagine anything, but I think the music, really helped with a particular movie in its context. I just wouldn't necessarily, uh, watch it, listen to it, in my own time, much like Big Eyes. My top three favorite tracks are the main titles, The Hunt, and Old Flames. Speaking of reimagining, we have another one that I would say is a little bit more on the remake, but thankfully it is a remake that A, I like, and B, I think these other remakes should have been doing from day one. You know what I'm talking about if you know what I'm talking about. Number 18, we have 2019's Dumbo. As many of you know, I have despised majority of the Disney live action remakes. I just wish they would die at this point. I know we've got more on the way, and at this point, I think it was just after seeing Robert Zemeckis' Pinocchio, I was just like, yeah, I'm done. I'm just done. Unless I'm generally intrigued and it looks like they're doing something different, I'm not bothered anymore. It almost feels like I'm a broken record trying to explain to people why I hate these remakes. But having that said, there are a handful that I do like, and Dumbo is one of them. I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, is it because it's directed by Tim Burton? Well, I mean, it's one of the elements, but it's mostly because it is a remake that takes, much like Planet of the Apes, it takes the same story, the same premise, but it 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 becomes its own thing, its own identity. That honestly, you can watch both films and enjoy them, as much on their own. And I just wish more of the live action remakes from Disney did that. Again, a handful do, some do, and I have hated them. I'm looking at you, Cinderella. I hate that movie. But um, anyway, let's actually get into Dumbo. I think what was nice about it is that at the same time, I think it can't be helped that there has to be some kind of homage to the original, because even though I think Dumbo was originally based on a book, but everyone associates with, of course, the Disney animated film, and it does have very, very memorable music from that one. So I think Daddy sort of wanted to pay homage to it in some way without necessarily ripping it off. There are, of course, moments in the score where, you can definitely hear the certain music from the original, like, Casey Jr., and of course Pink Elephants on Parade, things like that. And of course they have their own version of Baby Mine, and I think this is probably one of the reasons why, because I was stuck between 18 and 17. We'll get to 17 when we get to it. But I think, yeah, because Dumbo, you kind of have to pay homage to it. It did make it a little bit lower, but the more I listened to the score, the more memorable it seemed to get. It didn't quite stick with me at the beginning, but the more I listened to it, I was like, you know what? It does have its own unique theme, and I appreciate that. And also, I think it was a bit of a challenge for Danny, because, especially with a Tim Burton film, he's already done like circus related, scores. We'll get to those when we'll get to those. So having to do it differently, because this is a completely different circus, completely different gang, completely different, main character and premise. And I think he did it very well. And I think the main thing is, of course, the emotion, I think, but also the sort of inspirational factor, the idea of this outsider baby elephant that looks different but yet uses what would considered a disadvantage becomes, something hopeful and something that you know becomes a success in flying. So um yeah, that's my opinions on that. My top three favorite tracks from Dumbo are Trains a Comin', Colette's Theme, and Soaring Sweet. So, like I said, the reason why number 17 is a just beats Dumbo by a margin is because it could have so easily go back to the original music, because the original theme of this particular franchise, for lack of a better word, is so iconic, and thankfully that they didn't, but they still made it sound familiar while being its own thing. Coming at number 17, it is 2022's Netflix series Wednesday. Um, yeah, again, it's a little bit low on the list, and I'll explain that a bit later. As I said, they could have so easily gone with the iconic Addams Family theme. Who doesn't love that theme? Every time you hear it, you want to snap along to it. But you know what? There is only one instant where I heard, the da 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 dun in this score, and it was, to me, I think I heard it when Wednesday snaps her fingers twice for the first time. And again, I really loved that whole bit. Just hearing the, I don't know. It was just a really nice touch. Um, but of course, and I think the reason why it was different is because it is not about the Addams family. It is about one of the Addams family members, and that is, of course, Wednesday. And I think I think the two main instruments I associate with Wednesday is you have the series is you have the cello, which of course represents Wednesday, and the harpsichord, which of course represents the Addams family. So you hear the harpsichord plenty of times, but you also hear the cello going through time. And I think there is a particular track, and it is in my top three, where it's almost like there's a sort of almost like competing between the two instruments. And this is usually when, and this is the scene where Wednesday has that talk with Morticia, and she's like, "I'm not you. I'll never fall in love. I'll never become a housewife," and and all that. And you hear those two instruments. It's almost like sort of going head to head, and eventually within the episode during the parents' weekend, and they say their goodbyes. It's a little bit more on a harmonious, the way those instruments combine. So I think that was a very, very clever touch. The reason why it is still a little bit low on the list is because, so there was another composer along with Danny Elfman, Chris Bacon. And I'm not saying that, his music is bad or whatever, but there are some times where the music kind of sounds like it comes from a uh, different project almost. There are some that, most of the time the music does really, really flow well, but there are occasionally some scores, you know, that do kind of stick out a little bit, that maybe didn't quite jive with it completely. So again, I don't know if it's mainly because obviously TV, it's episodical, or because there was two composers at play as well. So um but as I said, that does not mean that it is a bad soundtrack. It was just something that I had noticed. Anyway, my top three tracks are Morticia and Wednesday, Burning Outcasts, and the Poe Cup Race. Coming up number 16. This is where it started to become a little bit more difficult for me to decide, because this is really where wherever these movies are put, it was just because at the end of the day there were just some soundtracks I preferred than others. So again, this was pretty difficult, but just go with me on this. At number 16, we have 1985's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Tim Burton's very first full-length feature film and Danny Elfman's first score he had ever done. So a bit of a background. So I've pretty much got over this a number of times. Paul Rubens, who plays Pee Wee Herman, was trying to look for a director to direct his full length feature film based on Pee Wee's Playhouse, and all the directors that pretty much Warner Brothers were picking were, Paul Rubens was like, no, no, that is not what I'm going for. That is not what I'm going for. Eventually, I think it was when he was working for the uh, Shelley Duvall's Fairy Tale Theatre, where she was like, "Oh yeah, no, I worked with this, I worked with this guy who directed a short called Frankenweenie. His name is Tim Burton, and yeah, no, he's pretty talented." Paul Rubens went and actually watched Frankenweenie, and he was like, "Oh my god, this is the guy. This is who I want to direct my movie." And thankfully, Tim said yes, and his career launched from there. And uh, and Danny Elfman at the time was in a band called Oingo Boingo, and Tim Burton loved going to see him in concerts in LA, and just asked him, "Have you ever thought about composing a score?" I think, I think, what was it? Danny said, I think he thought he was joking, but the reason why is because he thought Danny Elfman sounded very cinematic in his work, and clearly since he is now known as a movie composer, and that's pretty much uh his career changed. And so it was really, as I said, they had both started their careers, pretty much at the same time within the movie industry. And it's interesting to listen uh, to Pee Wee's Big Adventure as the sort of first step into composing for a movie. I think the best word to I think the best words to describe it are fun, uh, almost circus-like, almost kind of manic, but very childlike. And I'm not saying that as far as because obviously, Pee Wee Herman is a man child, so I think having that kind of childlike, almost sort of almost sort of like malice mischievous side, I think sort of helped it. And it was also interesting because, at the end of the day, it is a road trip. So with that it comes a different variation of music. So they were really sort of very much experimenting with very different types, and sometimes I think the music sort of adds to the comedy. There's that sort of almost sort of making fun of, like, Texas cowboy kind of music, um where uh I don't know what it is. I can't remember what the name of the instrument is, but the every time I hear that, I just burst out laughing. I don't know what it is. So yeah, it is definitely a fun soundtrack. There are just other soundtracks I prefer listening to. Top three tracks are, of course, The Breakfast Machine, Stolen Bike, and Clown Dream. Coming in at number 15, even though this was pretty much, I don't want to say a parody, but definitely a sort of look at, a sort of, nah, do you know what? I won't say parody. I'll say more of a love letter to B movie sci fi movies. And that is, of course, 1996 Mars Attacks. Considering that this is meant to be an homage to, uh, you know, B B sci-fi movies of like the 50s and 60s, it's interesting because on the one hand you've got this all A-list cast just running around screaming from these oddly CGI looking Martians. But then you have this very, very epic score that sounds something like on a very legitimate sci-fi movie that you would take very seriously. Um, but also it does have a bit, but also the score does have a bit of tongue in cheek in it, and that's what's fantastic about it. Um, I could go on and on about that opening title. It just absolutely, it just amps you up for it. It's like, okay, I don't care if these Martians are going to invade Earth. I want to see it with that absolute epic music going on in the background. So, you know, however, the reason why it's at number 15 is mainly because, let's just say, any music that's surrounding the Martians is fantastic. Anything surrounding the humans are okay. It's mainly like military based music, which I'm not a huge fan of. So, as I said, anything surrounding the Martians is epic. So, but do you know what? I think it works better that way because, let's face it, they're the ones who steal the show. They're the ones we want to see, even if they are invading our home planet. But you know what? With that music playing in the background, sure, fine, take that any day. Top three tracks are, of course, the main titles, The Arrival, and Ungodly Experiments. So, while Mars Attacks was certainly a love letter to B movie science fiction, this one is definitely a love letter to Universal Monsters. At number 14, we have 2012's Frankenweenie. Now, as I mentioned before, this film is based on a live action short film that Tim Burton did while he was working at Disney. And it wasn't until um, curators from Museum of Modern Art in New York City wanted to make an art exhibition out of his drawings. He came across the Frankenweenie drawings that he had did many, many years ago and think, you know what? I can see this as a stop motion film, and thank God, because I think stop motion is really the best medium for this kind of story as a Frankenstein story bringing something to life. So with that, I was interested to see what Danny was going to do with the fact that there were going to be more monsters in this. That was obviously paying homage to the famous Universal monsters, and also the relationship between Victor and Sparky, because that really is the heart of the film, and I think he does them both great. I would say the most significant instrument in it is, of course, the organ. Every time they would do any kind of experiment trying to resurrect something back from the dead, that organ just kicks in, and yeah, it almost makes you want to. Every time I watch Frankenweenie or listen to the soundtrack, it makes me want to. Well, it makes me want to go and watch the original Universal monster movies because it just has that impact. But at the same time, we have that very sweet theme of Victor and Sparky. It is very, yeah, it's just very sweet because at the end of the day, and the music and the visuals do this as well. Because at the end of the day, it's just about a boy and his dog. Even though all this insanity ensues around them, that's really the heart of it, and I think it is very moving. I think it is, it's sort of almost sort of subconsciously teaches kids about death and how you experience it, and I think the music does help with that. Top three favorite tracks are The Funeral, Invisible Fish / Search for Sparky, and Final Confrontation. At number 13, we're actually going to go for another black and white movie. Yeah, you guessed it. It is 1994's Ed Wood. This one is an interesting one to talk about because, unfortunately, around the time Tim and Danny had a bit of a falling out due to events that had happened while making Nightmare Before Christmas. So there was a brief time where they just weren't speaking to each other, and eventually they thought, you know what, I can't I can't live without this person in my life. I think Danny described it as losing a brother. They pretty much put their differences aside and said, we were stupid, let's just carry on, and Danny went back to do to do Mars Attacks. So for Ed Wood, the score was composed by Howard Shore, who is mainly famous for doing The Lord of the Rings, Silence of the Lambs, Seven, Hugo. So he's a great talent. And honestly, even though part of me kind of wonders what the score would have been like if Danny had done it, but at the same time, I think we would have missed out because I think Howard Shore does contribute a lot to it. It's definitely the most different score, not just because it was from a different composer, but just the tone of it. What's the best way of describing it? It feels like almost low down Hollywood, but having said that, it still sounds positive, and I think that is pretty much Ed Wood in a nutshell. Yes, he is known as the worst director of all time, even though I don't agree with that statement. I think there has been far worse films than Ed's films combined, really. Um, but so even though he is known as the worst director of all time, he always had that optimism, and it clearly shows within the music. It makes you amp up and think, yeah, you know what, he can do it. And then you see the film, it's like, okay, maybe not quite, but it's like, you know what, you have such optimism, like, I believe in you, like, I believe in you. It's so ironic that, the biopic about the worst filmmaker of all time is ironically the best film to show someone who wants to go into filmmaking, who wants to direct. How about that? So, um, so yeah, there's definitely the the jazzy style, but what I also love in particular is the music choices that are played for Bela Lugosi. There are moments when he is at his lowest, and you hear a bit of Swan Lake. Now, this was actually pretty funny because I had watched Ed Wood before I had actually seen Bela Lugosi's Dracula, and I was like, "Is that Swan Lake I'm hearing in the background? Like, what, why?" And when I finally saw Dracula, I was like, "Oh, they play Swan Lake as the opening to okay, that makes sense." So when I heard it again, when I watched Ed Wood again, I was like, you know what? I feel the emotional impact by using that music, and that was beautiful. So good, good one there. So yeah, jazzy, a little bit low down as far as Hollywood goes, because we're not in the glamorous part of Hollywood in this movie. But you know what? With Ed's optimism and the music's optimism, it puts a smile on your face. So the top three tracks are the main titles, Mr. Lugosi's Hypno theme, and Ed Takes Control. Moving on at number 12, we also have a soundtrack that was not composed by Danny Elfman. It was mainly due to the fact that he was too busy around the time this movie was being made. However, one of the composers had worked closely with him, either as like a music, I want to say editor or music supervisor. So it was a chance for him and another co-composer to really, shine a light on them and give them a chance. At number 12, we have 2016's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Now, the reason I say he's collaborated with Danny over the years is because you can definitely see that inspiration from Danny to it was Michael Higham and Matthew Margeson who co-composed for Miss Peregrine, and you could definitely see the influential style of music that Danny is sort of acclaimed to, because in some ways it's like, yeah, you know what, I think this would be pretty close to what Danny would have come up with for this movie. The main thing that I would definitely associate with the Peregrine score is clocks and birdsong. There is a lot of ticking in the score, but that is perfect because obviously the peculiars are in this time loop, and it almost feels like reliving the same day over and over and over again. even though to them it creates a sanctuary, and the music definitely creates that, but it also gives that kind of almost time lapsey kind of feel. So the ticking kind of sort of has that feeling. So there's sort of like a pros and cons of living the way the peculiars do, because yes, while it is peaceful, it is a sanctuary, but it's also, you're the same age physically, maybe not mentally. You're living the same day, having to do the same chores, and at the end of the day, you are trying to stay safe from dangers out there. And it it's interesting how the ticking has that sort of positive but negative effect on it. And of course, the bird song relates to Miss Peregrine herself. As the Overlooker, she is an inbreed, which means she can turn into a bird, but it also gives that sort of motherly, nurturing um, feeling to the score. And also, there is the relationship between Jake and his grandfather. Um, this was definitely probably the emotional stuff for me personally, just because I have very fond memories of my grandfather reading me. Mainly, it was Alice in Wonderland, but and I think that's a lot of people's fondest memories with grandparents, is just hearing their stories of their past and everything. I remember my other grandfather talking about his experience during the Blitz during World War II. Um, and really the struggles he had to go through during that, growing up in this war. So I think those particular moments in Miss Peregrine really did stick out to me, and the score really helps with that. Top three favorite tracks are A Place Like This, Squirrel Rescue, and The Augusta. At number 11, I think the best way to describe this is Pee-wee's Big Adventure is definitely, it was where Tim and Danny were trying to find themselves as far as director and composer goes. However, because Pee Wee Herman was an existing character, I think that sort of helped them. With this one, though, it was really a chance for both of them to really show off what they could do as a director and composer. At number 11, we have 1988's Beetlejuice. Oh boy, interesting story about this one. So, I think Danny came in pretty confident with this one. He thought, okay, I've composed a score. I think I have some idea what this film is. Yeah, let's go for it. And I think he created almost a whole score for it. But when he finally saw the film, he was like, oh, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. So he had to go and redo it. And yeah, like I said, it was really a chance to show the imagination of Tim Burton and Danny Elfman, and it was a chance for them to go absolutely wild. And I think the soundtrack definitely has that. Instead of that sort of childlike, um, childlike quality to it that Pee Wee had, this was a chance to go a little bit more devious, a little bit more carnival almost. An absolute just chaos, really. I think that's the best word. Because, you know, for me, watching Beetlejuice for the first time, I had no idea what the story was. All I knew is that it had something to do with ghosts. I had no idea what the plot was. And everyone was like, no, you just have to watch it to understand. And you just have, the opening shot of just going through this very mundane, looking American town, and then you have this absolutely crazy, almost in your face score, and you're thinking, huh? Because at first you think it's going to be quite jarring, and I'm like, maybe that's it. Maybe the music is basically telling you you are not ready to what you are about to experience, and you shouldn't be, because we want to blow your minds with what's coming. You got a big storm coming, and that is basically the music. It is definitely a fun, wild time, much like the Ghost of the Most himself. Top three tracks are Main Titles, In the Model, and Showtime. Okay, so now we are officially entering the top tens now. I'm wondering how many of you have figured out which order they are. So anyway, coming in at number 10, we have probably one of the most emotional scores I think Danny has done to date, and one of the most emotional movies Tim Burton has done to date. I think you can guess which one this is. This is 2003's Big Fish. Oh, yes. Yep, always need the box of tissues for this one. And it's partly why it's at number 10. I would have had it a bit higher, except every time I do listen to this, particularly to certain tracks, I just, oh my god, I can't help but tear up at it. Um, it's just you know how sometimes there are some scores that just enhance an already, beautiful looking movie and a well told. I mean, this is just one of those instances. It's like, if the visuals and storytelling wasn't bringing you to tears, the music is going to push you over that push you over that line, and Big Fish certainly does that, especially for me. And again, I think it helped that going in. I mean, I saw the movie before I even knew who Tim Burton was as a film director, let alone who Danny Elfman was as a composer, and I had absolutely no idea what the film was going to be about. I was just, it was just me and the boarding school. We were just we were brought to the school auditorium and watched it on a projection, and all of us were just in tears at the end. Um, I think we were all not prepared for what was coming in a way. Anyway, let's actually talk about the music. So, I think what was interesting about this one is not only the the emotion that it carries, but also, just don't get me wrong, there are definitely positive music in this. In fact, I would say a majority of it is. Um, I think what was interesting about this particular score is that Danny had to sort of find that fine line between um, sort of the reality aspect and the fantasy aspect, and have that feel of Southern America. And I think he found that, and there's plenty of strings going on, and as soon as you would hear it among, if you had his scores on shuffle, and a track from a track from this came on, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's immediately Big Fish, because of that southern atmosphere that it brings. And certainly the fairy tale aspect as well, and it sort of it again, it just illustrates what the film's trying to say, is just, life is full of unexpected moments. Sometimes, sometimes, yeah, it can be very unexpected. It can be absolutely beautiful. It can sometimes be scary. It can sometimes be sad. It's just all, both Danny and Tim really had to just go for everything. It is a film pretty much about life, and there's a lot of aspects of life. So yeah, definitely bring a tissue box every time you watch this movie. I know I do, and even just from listening to the score on its own. So anyway, my four favorite tracks are Sandra's theme, The Journey Home, Underwater, and the finale. Okay, so going from emotional to spooky. Thought I'd give a little pause there. See if you can figure out which one this is. This is 1999's Sleepy Hollow. Of course, it was probably between this one and another one. Don't worry, that one's coming. So Sleepy Hollow. This was really a chance for, I guess you could say, for Tim and Danny to really show their love for classic horror. And it really shows in both the visuals and the score. Obviously, it's more of a love letter to Hammer, whether something like Frankenweenie was more for Universal monster movies, but it is gorgeous nonetheless. And I think that's the interesting thing about the music. It's spooky, it's eerie, it's haunting, but it's beautiful, it's poetic, and I think because I always feel like with with horror films, there are definitely some scores that as soon as you hear it, no matter how many times you've heard it, it can still send shivers down your spine. I can think of some at the top of my head. I'm wondering what yours are, but there are some, but sometimes you can sort of slightly tell that they're, I don't want to say trying too hard, but trying to get that feeling to scare you, particularly in modern horror, certainly. Um, but this was a good match because Sleepy Hollow is really in its own world, and I think that's sort of the magic of the film. And the music certainly supports that. It is in its own world, and you could even make the argument because you are you are traveling to Sleepy Hollow in with Ichabod. He is not just the main character, he's also the point of view character. He's the inspector. He's got to figure out what's going on with all these beheadings and all that, and he is a character that is very much in his head. So you know uh, so I think, but at the same time, the music still lends itself, I would say, more often than not, more folktale than I'd say horror. And because the Headless Horseman is really a very American folktale at the end of the day, and it definitely has different aspects, but the majority of it, as we know, is mainly a ghost story and whatever. So it's, I guess the best way to describe the score is it's definitely, creepy in all the right places, but it's strangely poetic, and that's what's so hypnotic about it. Favorite four tracks are the main titles: Into the Woods, The Witch, Evil Eye, and Love Lost. So, notice how I said, when I said spooky or scary or whatever I said before, you were probably thinking of another one as well. You were thinking, it's either going to be Sleepy Hollow or this. Well, this one comes at number 8. We have 2007's Sweeney Todd. Okay, so I think quite a lot of you probably expected this to be in the top 10. Anyone who knows me, because it is one of my favorite musicals. I am very into my gothic musicals, Sweeney Todd, Phantom of the Opera, you know, music like that. And I think the reason why Sweeney Todd definitely stands out to me personally is because it is combining, two things that you wouldn't think would collaborate as well as it did, which is of course horror and musicals. And because at the end of the day, something like Phantom of the Opera, it's definitely gothic, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily horror. I think if you wanted to go for horror, you probably want to go towards something like the Lon Chaney silent movie. Or I have yet to check out the Hammer version. I'm very interested in that one. So to be fair, I'm quite behind on my Hammer films. So I have a quite a long uh watch list to go. Anyway, we're back on Sweeney Todd. So but oh no, I was making my point. Sorry. Because Phantom of the Opera, at the end of the day, it's more of a gothic romance. Whereas with Sweeney Todd, I think it is pure horror, because the idea of a barber searching for revenge, slitting throats, and then not just that, just turning them into pies, so there's cannibalism involved. And it's like, yeah, fair enough. So I think that's pure horror. So but yet the two elements just seem to work so seamlessly, and that really is down to Stephen Sondheim's music. um I've not seen it live. I am wanting to see it live. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. I've seen an amateur production of Sweeney Todd, and that was fun. But I would love to see a professional performance either in London or on tour or something. That'd be brilliant. So so however, I have seen they had a filmed version of the stage show, um, the one where Angela Lansbury is Mrs. Lovett, and I noticed that the stage show was sort of more leaning towards like dark comedy, whereas the movie is more of a sort of a tragic story, but it still has its moments of humor. Of course, it's a Tim Burton film; it always has a sense of humor. So and it was, but yeah, it was so interesting because seeing that shift in tone not only made it work for the movie much better than I think if they sort of, I think if it lent more towards the comedy, I don't think it would have worked as much. But again, the score just works on both levels. You can, you know, you can see the wittiness of something like, you know, a little priest, but then you can also, you know, but then you can also get to the serious moments where it's, Sweeney Todd sort of almost planning that revenge in My Friends, and the sort of tragedy of Mrs. Lovett just pining after Sweeney Todd, and there's that tragedy there. Joanna being completely isolated. I don't know. So it's just I think it sort of works very much like Sleepy Hollow in a way, except this time it's with songs. Even though it's horror, it's so poetic, but in this case it's tragic as well, and it has that little bit of comedy as well, which works. And considering that the cast were mainly non-singers, I have to say I was very impressed. I think if they brought in a someone who could professionally do it, I think it would have. I think it would have sort of clashed. I think that was my biggest problem with, like, one of my problems with the Phantom of the Opera movie is that, Minnie Driver was dubbed, and it was dubbed by a professional opera singer, and it's just like, and then you hear everyone else's, and it's just like, oh man. So, anyway, okay, so my favorite tracks are opening titles, My Friends, Pretty Women, and By the Sea. Okay, coming in at number 7. I wonder how many of you might have thought this would have been in my top 5, but anyway, it was very, very, very close. And the other one as well. So, I knew I had to get these two movies back to back. And it was, again, it's very interesting because while I prefer one movie as a whole over the other, I think I prefer the score over the other, over the other one. So it's going to be interesting. Anyway, coming in at number 7 is 1989's Batman. I'll just let that sink in for a little bit. I mean, what can you say? I would make the argument that the Batman theme is probably one of the best movie themes in cinema history. Fight me. Like, I I think the best way to describe it is really my first experience watching Batman, because before I was not into superheroes. I couldn't care less about superhero movies. Imagine what I would have been like, when Marvel started. I'd just be like, oh my god, I'm sick of all these comic book movies and whatever. And of course, after discovering uh, Tim Burton, and so I was like, I need to watch every single movie he's done, and obviously I came across his Batman movies, and I was like, oh, great, he did a superhero movie. And I was quite reluctant in seeing it because I just didn't want to associate with comic book movies. I was very against them for a long time. And anyway, eventually I saw it and I just said, okay, fine, he directed it. You never know. Just bite the bullet and maybe you might enjoy it. Because I knew vaguely who Batman was and like his backstory and everything. I kind of knew who the Joker was, mainly because the Dark Knight was everywhere. And I thought, okay, I'll watch it. So this was when I was in holiday. I got back to the hotel when I was done. I popped it in, and even though it was on a very, very tiny portable DVD player, it was a tiny, tiny screen, I heard that music, I heard the theme, and I was like, I get it. Like, I get it. Uh, I am now hyped for this. Like, I was feeling so excited to watch the rest of this movie. And then as soon as I finished the movie, I was like, yep, I can see why he is one of the best superheroes ever. And next day, I went straight back to the shop and got Batman Returns. So there you go. So if that's not a sign of a good theme, I don't know what is. So anyway, but obviously it's not just that. I think what makes it so great, the theme especially, is just it just defines Batman. I can't think of any other music that defines Batman as well as that theme. Um, it you have that image of him just in the shadows when it's quiet, but it's very mysterious, and then when the march kicks in, this is when you envision him, fighting whatever. But I love that it goes back to that quiet, low side, as though he's done his thing, he's gonna go back into the shadows, and that's it. I'm like, that's Batman. Like, that is Batman. Um, but other than that, the rest of the score from the movie is, I almost want to say, operatic. Almost, it's just it sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but just from someone who was just so reluctant in watching any comic book movies, and just hearing this music, particularly, another great example is when Batman is leading Vicky Vale into the Batcave. All that scene is just him driving the Batmobile, along a road in the woods and into the Batcave. It's like, okay, fair enough, but with that music, I mean, I don't think I need to explain it. Like, I really don't. So I think I've nerded out over particular scores. Anyway, so my favorite tracks are the Batman theme, duh, Descent into Mystery, Up the Cathedral, and Waltz to the Death. So, like I said, I couldn't put, I knew I had to put these two movies back to back. And even though I do prefer the first Batman movie as a whole, I do think that its sequel had the better score. So, coming in at number 6, it is 1992's Batman Returns. Now, I think the reason I prefer the score over the first film is because I think because both Tim and Danny had a chance to explore with new characters, and that's what essentially led Tim to direct the next one, because he was like, oh, there's new characters to explore, and I'd really love to experiment with them, with Catwoman and the Penguin. And it was also a chance for Danny to explore their characters as well, and so I think Batman Returns is a really great example of character music. And and I would say, and I would argue this case for pretty much all of his music for the films of Tim Burton, is that they are very character music. But Batman Returns especially really stands out to me, and a couple of more others do, as you'll find out. So, you know, as soon as you hear that Penguin music, you just instantly think of, the Penguin just wandering around in the sewers in the dark with his umbrella and everything like that. There's a sort of sinister but also an almost tragic side to it. And of course, the Catwoman theme with the strings, it's just so. Oh, it's creepy. I love it. But then also, I am so glad that he also did a, I don't want to say like a totally different, I want to say, variation of the Batman theme. It wasn't just like a copy and paste from the first movie with Batman's theme. It was sort of shifted a little bit to make it sort of stand out on its own, but still you hear that theme, and I really appreciate that. Um, so I, yeah, I think I've really summed it up there. It's just a really great example of character music. It and you got three really great characters to explore there. Again, it's much like the first Batman. I think it's elevated a comic book movie even more, in my opinion. As I said, after watching Batman and being completely surprised by it, I went straight, to buy Batman Returns. Did. And I was just even more impressed as well, and the score was really standing out to me. So anyway, my favorite tracks are Birth of a Penguin, Part 1, Selena Transforms, Part 2, Sore Spots, and the finale, Part 1. Okay, now we're heading into the top 5. So this is where I'm going to have my 5 favorite tracks. So, for number 5, this was a score that, I'll be honest, I thought at first, was different, considering what was being adapted to the screen. But the more I heard it, I thought, you know what? This is absolutely perfect. Coming in at number 5, 2010's Alice in Wonderland. So, I would even make the argument that the Alice theme is, I won't say the best one in cinema, but certainly one of my personal favourite movie themes ever. And because it's so interesting, because I have loved Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is one of my favorite childhood books ever. My grandfather could recite the whole thing by heart almost, and one of my fondest memories is just listening to him read Alice in Wonderland. So I was a quite a harsh critic when it came to any kind of film adaptation, and Alice in Wonderland was coming out around the time I had just discovered who Tim Burton was. So I was extremely hyped because I thought, oh, Tim Burton and Alice in Wonderland. Oh my god, this is perfect. And the music was sort of surprising because it was very it was definitely not like any Alice score I had heard up until then. But having that said, not a lot of adaptations I had seen at that point were, for me at least, hit the mark on the spirit of the books. And I think, I don't think the music was, crazy for the sake of crazy and trying to be out there and trying to. I think what was so great about it is that, and I think this came from the Alice theme lyrics, because Danny Elfman has said that when he was writing it, he kept hearing Alice, his name, and so he ended up writing all these lyrics, and Alice was just constantly there in that theme, and I think that was what the best thing to go is. It's not, the music wasn't Wonderland, but it was Alice, and that's really what the film is centered around. It is about, it's about Alice in Wonderland, you know. Um, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So anyway, and I think, but having that said, they were, he was able to do certain types of music that as soon as I hear it, I would immediately think, oh, that sounds like the Cheshire Cat. Oh, that sounds like the Red Queen. Oh, that sounds like the White Queen. Oh, that sounds like the Mad Hatter. Like, oh, that's the Caterpillar. Absolutely. So, as soon as you hear those certain beats, it's like, yeah. And again, this comes back to what I said about Batman Returns, is that it's very character music. And so combining them all together, but still bringing it back to Alice, I think was the most important part, because it is really her story and she is really the focus. A lot of adaptations would just kind of have her as the point of view character, whereas this one, it was really putting her right dab in center, because Wonderland is her land. And I think that really gave the spirit of the book, to me anyway. And yeah, absolutely love it. So anyway, my top five favourite tracks are Alice's theme, of course, Proposal, Down the Rabbit Hole, The Cheshire Cat, Only a Dream, and Alice Decides. So coming in at number four, I was actually battling between whether choosing this or Alice. Um, so I thought, you know what? It's sort of like Batman and Batman Returns. I needed to kind of have them back to back because they're slightly similar, but definitely different in their own right. And while I think Alice definitely captured the spirit of Alice in Wonderland, in my opinion, this one, I think not only captured the book and the author, but also, in my opinion, Danny and Tim, in that they might seem strange, they might seem unusual, but there is a genius to it. Coming in at number four is 2005's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So, interesting enough, Charlie was actually my very, very first Tim Burton movie I had ever saw. Granted, I had no idea who he was. I just remember seeing the trailer and I thought, oh my god, this looks amazing. And being such a Roald Dahl fan, I was so hyped. And having seen it at this, and going to the cinema, I was like, this is. I really felt like I was stepping into another world, and I hadn't felt that since I'd seen the first Harry Potter movie. So, um, it, it and the music really felt it almost like, as I said, it's like you're diving into the mind of a mad genius, and that is Willy Wonka. You know, there's there's almost that sort of sinister, but tongue in cheek, but creative, imaginative, but also very, that sort of social distance, kind of like, oh no, I don't really like people very much. But there's also just that feeling of wonder and I don't really want to say magic because I don't think it is magic. I just say it's wonder of like the factory and looking from Charlie's perspective and everything but it definitely has that sense of humor to it as well. And of course, I can't go out without mentioning the Oompa Loompa songs, and I thank God that Danny didn't just do a copy and paste. I know people are gonna really disagree with me on this one, but I was never a fan of the Oompa Loompa song from the 70s version. I think that's when it came out. The Gene Wilder film. I'm sorry, and the fact that they repeated it and repeated it and repeated it as a kid, I was not happy. So thank God he didn't just copy and paste it, but instead gave each one their own unique musical style. But it was also an added bonus because it fits with whatever set they were in or whatever child they were talking about. It sort of just seemed to fit all together, and it was, oh my god, it was brilliant. So um yeah, and the fact that it was pretty much Danny Elfman, all the Oompa Loompa voices were him, So listening to that soundtrack and being like, "Yep, that's it," doing all these different, voices, was just this. I don't know, just this added bonus to the soundtrack. So anyway, um, yeah, no, I love it. I absolutely love it. So favorite tracks are main titles, Wheels in Motion, The Golden Ticket / Factory, Up and Out, and the end credit suite. Okay, so now we are heading into the top three. I won't be listing my favorite tracks because pretty much from this point onwards, it's just listen to the whole thing. You can't go wrong with any of the tracks on this one. There are certainly ones that stand out to me, but just listen to the whole thing. So anyway, now I know that people will probably say, oh, this wasn't directed by Tim Burton, so this doesn't count. But I'm sorry, if you're going to talk about, the collaboration between Tim Burton and Danny Elfman, how can you not talk about this one? So, Coming in at number three, we have 1993's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Absolutely. Yes, as I've said multiple times, and I've tried to sort of spread the word in my videos, that even though Tim Burton did not direct Nightmare Before Christmas, it was directed by Henry Selick, who is also mostly known for directing Coraline and James the Giant Peach. To me, Nightmare is a Tim Burton film just because of, I mean, you just take one look at it. If there was no Tim Burton, there'd be no Nightmare Before Christmas. Just simple as. So, and really and truthfully, this also came down to his collaboration with Danny Elfman, and it, and there really was, it was really just lightning in a bottle when it came to this score. I think it was, because obviously it was based on a poem that Tim Burton had wrote, and obviously they had to find ways to kind of stretch things out. Henry was saying like, guys, do I actually have anything for my crew to animate right now? And they were like, oh god, like okay, because they needed to get this going. Because it was, it was a no pun intended nightmare to get this movie off the ground. So eventually, Tim and Danny was just like, okay, well, what, like, how does it start? Like, what's the beginning? And he'd be like, oh well, it starts off in Halloween Town, and Jack Skellington's the Pumpkin King and everything. And Daddy's like, okay, I think I've got like an opening number. And like, okay, well, Jack is, he's feeling depressed because he's doing the same thing over and over again, constantly scaring, and like, and Daddy's like, okay, great, fair enough. And it was just like a constant, okay, what happens next? And like, okay, write a song. What happens next? And it was just a way to flesh it out. And it's even more interesting considering that this was made during the Disney Renaissance. And the thing I noticed that even though the Disney Renaissance was mainly known for going into that sort of more Broadway style of music, pick one, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and whatever. But they didn't have as many songs as I thought they did. Like going back and listening to their soundtracks, I was like, you know what? There's not that many songs. They're great songs, but there's not that many. Nightmare has like double, almost triple that, the number, and it just you can't imagine that film without the music. And that was the most important part, is if you took the music out, what would you have left? And it's like, you wouldn't, aside from the amazing stop motion animation, but as far as a storytelling perspective goes, you pretty much wouldn't have, it, it was a way to take, Tim Burton's poem and really just bring out the brilliance of it. And as far as favorite songs are concerned, that's a difficult one. I honestly don't know which one's my favorite. I think if I were to choose, I'm stuck between three, which is Jack's Lament, Kidnap the Sandy Claus, and the Oogie Boogie song. Close second would be Sally's song. But yeah, I just pick any of them, really. I even love listening to the end credits because it's basically just an instrumental medley of all the songs, and I love it. So, and that's also the clever thing about the instrumental as well. And this is what the Disney Renaissance films also did, is that when they focused on a character and moving the story along, they still had the melody from those songs, in the instrumental, so you can always just consciously connect with those characters just from listening to the music. So as soon as you hear, Sally, music when Sally's on screen, it's like, yeah, that's Sally's song. That's Sally, Anyway. So anyway, as I said, I'm not going to be naming any tracks because just listen to the whole thing. Okay, so coming in at number 2. This is going to be interesting because if anyone knows me, they'll probably think, oh, well, I can guess which number 1 is, it's, it's gotta be this one. Well, psych, it's actually number 2. We have 1990s Edward Scissorhands. Some of you are like, huh? What? Because as I've pointed out many times, Edward Scissorhands is my favorite movie of all time. Now, the reason why the one at number one is at number one, I will go into that when we get to that. So anyway, so because I really had to kind of think about it. I was like, forget about the movies, think about the scores. And I was like, you know what, this was just slightly better. But I was like, man, do I want to put Edward Scissorhands? Like, can I just put them at joint one? But, I'd be kidding myself. So anyway, so let's actually get into the music of Edward Scissorhands. I mean, as soon as you hear it, that's just immediately what you think of. And I think it's just, you know, this is going back to that whole, character music thing. I mean, the music is really Edward. It's really Edward's voice, and this is, and this is what makes the music so important. Essential to it is because obviously Edward doesn't have much of a voice. Johnny Depp kept cutting lines. I'm trying to remember what the exact how many lines he actually has in the film. So but so it makes sense having this type of music that's very, the choir involved, because it is pretty much his voice, and there's all these aspects to Edward's character, and it helps make us, love him even more, and understand him more, because we're sort of hearing him through the music, from both his, you know from, that childlike wonder that he has, his clumsy side, his romantic side, his scared side, his nervous side, but his fun side, his artistic side, especially. It's just all there. And if it's not there, then it's a pretty much a satire of American suburbia. And you know as soon as you hear it, it's just like, oh yeah, I'm envisioning all the, the housewives outside the house. As soon as something unusual happens, it's just, scramble, 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 scramble. you know or just like that, almost like clockwork type of like, oh yeah, every day's just the same, in this cookie cutter world. you know um but oh man. And much like Big Fish, yep, it is one that I can just listen to it on its own, and I tear up. It's just, it's my favorite movie for so many reasons, and the music is definitely a reason for that as well. It definitely helped, and let's just say listening to that soundtrack got me through some tough times. So I will always be grateful for that. So anyway, as I said, listen to any track. So um, it's just it's a masterpiece. Okay, so you've probably deduced now which one is at number one, and I bet some people might be a little bit surprised. Some of you maybe not. Again, I'd love to hear your opinions or your personal rankings. But for me, I really thought long and hard about this one, and I think it's best to just go into it and explain myself. So anyway, in my opinion, the best music from the films of Tim Burton is 2005's Corpse Bride. So, why is it number one? Well, if so, Edward Scissorhands pretty much introduced me to Tim Burton subconsciously, and I ended up doing a bit of research and found out who he was, and I needed to know. Uh, I just needed to know everything. And one of the films, because I had seen three films that were directed by him when I didn't know it was him. One was Big Fish, the other was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and the other was Corpse Bride. And the Corpse Bride movie made me realize almost the importance of music in film, and I think that's what gives it the upper hand. So I probably have gone through this story before, but for those who don't know, Corpse Bride was definitely a movie I wanted to see, but unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to see it. And all my friends at school were like, "Oh my god, you have got to see it! It is so good," and I just didn't. I wasn't able to get a chance to see it at the cinema, and I was just like, "Oh my god, I wanted to see it so badly." And anyway, and it was around a time of my birthday, and the DVD had come out, and unfortunately, I ended up catching flu. If any of you have had flu, I think the best way for me to describe it, from my experience, it is like I am dead, but I am still alive. So, I am just the living dead. I don't want to. I don't want to do anything, even if I'm hungry. I don't want to eat. If I'm thirsty, I just don't want to drink. I just don't have the energy to. All I want to do is just sleep. And at that point in time, the best way to get me off to sleep was to have something in the background, whether it was music or if it was, a film. So I had pretty much this pile of DVDs and just watched one by one and not really paying attention to it and whatever. And as I said, it was around about my birthday, and my mom had got me Corpse Bride. And she ended up putting it on, and I was a bit kind of like, "Oh, but mom, like I haven't seen it yet, and I don't want to fall asleep to it. I've wanted to see this for a long time." Anyway, she popped it on anyway. Because like I'm gonna have the strength to argue when I'm when I'm just like, oh, I just want to sleep. Anyway, so music starts. You get that opening shot. And my eyes were still open. I was like, like, oh, I wanted to see this. Try and stay awake. Try and stay awake. And I listened to the first song. Thought it was catchy. Thought it was fun. I was still awake enough to kind of understand what was happening. And anyway, and obviously there's that whole scene where the parents are greeted to each other, and there's that awkwardness between them, and I was like, I was feeling myself suddenly going to sleep. Then came the part where Victor starts playing his piano solo, and as soon as he started playing, it was like my eyes just widened, and I felt myself sitting up, and I was just listening to this music, and then I ended up watching the entire movie wide awake. If that's it, for me, like, much like the Batman thing, if that is not a sign for a good movie, let alone music score as well, I really don't know what is. I just every time I hear that piano solo from Victor, I just think back to when I first saw this movie, and I thought, oh, this is, because even though I wanted to see it, I had no idea. I had no idea what I was prepared, and I certainly wasn't prepared for that. I was like, this is not going to be the type of movie that I thought it was going to be. It ended up being beautiful, and funny, romantic, and it it sort of opened my eyes to the importance of music, and having that distinction between the land of the living and the land of the dead, both in its visuals and its music, really, really helped that. You know, if I'm being honest, if I'm going to be judging it on the songs, then I would say Nightmare definitely has the upper hand. But at the same time, it's like, I think to the instrumental, and I don't know what it is. It's just it just has that beauty to it, that upper hand a little bit, and I think it was really just my first experience with it. I think the closest I ever got to that feeling was probably the Harry Potter music, because that theme is so iconic. It's in your head. It's much like anyone. I didn't grow up with Star Wars or anything, but I suspect as soon as any kid who grew up with it and then hears that theme, whatever, you always have that type of music that just really connects to you. And for me, it is the Corpse Bride music, and I think that's why, to me, it is the number one score. I probably haven't explained myself very well, but I tried. So, anyway, I am interested to see who else has Corpse Bride as their favorites. I'm very, very curious. Um, but anyway, that is my rankings for the music from the films of Tim Burton. I really hope you guys enjoy. If any of you would like to see more rankings, if you'd like me to go through different aspects of Tim Burton movies, it could be anything. Please let me know down in the comments, and of course, I will see you soon. Take care.